seen or heard them on stage, sublime in performance. What goes on in their minds? What lies behind the choices they make, the paths they choose? Here is a glimpse into an artist's mind, an exploration of an artist's journey, both in art and in life, with a treasury of insights. It is about who they become as they evolve into artists, their transformation through the struggles in that journey. Discover the human behind the artist.
In any field or in any endeavor, walls are always going to appear. Hit a wall and then you don't know what to do. The question is, one, can you recognize the wall? Second, can you break it? The fact is that the wall has to be broken. There's no argument there. I grew up in incredible privilege. My father's side of the family has been involved in music in some sense. My father's uncle, that is his mother's brother, was T.T. Krishnamachari, one of the founders of the Music Academy in Madras, Chennai. And so music, especially Carnatic music specifically, has been part of, say, home, listening, interest, etc. That's my father's side of the family. My mother's side of the family too. Actually, my mother's side of the family is from Kerala. So my mother's mother played the veena. She's one of those people who came to study in Madras then as something like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old to Theosophical school here, to the Alcott school then, I think. And so she loved music. My mother then became a graduate in music. So music in the sense has been part of both sides of my family. But not musicians. My mother, yes, does sing and trained, but otherwise not to become a professional musician per se. My father's side is more, shall we say, the connoisseur and, within quote, patron, whatever that means. So music has been at home, and I don't have an early recollection of this, but my mother claims that when she revived her musical interest, that is after her two sons were born, I used to sit in her music class and sit with a stick, presuming it was a tambura, and just hum whatever she learned. So they decided that, okay, this guy has to learn music and show some talent.
It's like a Western piece. It's called English note because it's Western type. He always used to do. So don't record this. That's too, I cannot sing.
There's one memory that I've recounted many times, and that is a very important memory for me, is listening to Patama at the Academy. I don't know which year it was the 80s, probably the later part of the 80s. And I remember it was a morning concert. I had gone alone. By then I was just listening to concerts. I used to be at every concert. In music season, you could see me running from here and there at every concert. And usually free concerts because I didn't have tickets for evening concerts. And I remember sitting in the stairs in the first floor. It was so full. And Patama was singing Shanti Nilavendum. I don't think I had any knowledge of even Tamil then that made any sense to me. So it was not like I understood the words she was singing, I felt patriotic or nationalism suddenly grew in me. Nothing of that sort. And I'm not some big Gandhian to hear Gandhi's name and cry for it. No. I just started crying. And I remember I walked to my grandmother's house, which was just stone's throw from there, just crying on the road. And I didn't know why I was crying. I didn't know what she had done special that day. But I will never forget that experience, because that's the first time I think in my memory that I was so deeply moved by something, but I didn't have a reason to be moved by it, which is I think that is true magic. I think that's the first time I felt music truly, and that's a memory that I will never forget. I will never forget, because it brings goosebumps even today, because it was special. It was special because it's kind of a realization I was what, 14 maybe, for a 14-year-old. It was spectacular. Well, I joined KFI, the school, in 4th grade. My house is a kind of eclectic place in terms of philosophies and discussions. My house is always full of arguments and discussions. I don't remember my house ever being quiet. It is said my grandfather had a loud enough voice that 3 streets later you could hear him. I probably got his voice. So it's a loud place where people argued and you discussed anything. There was one thing, my home, there was nothing that was taboo. Even as a child, you could discuss anything. And you know, to think of a conservative, not traditional, but conservative, household where you could have a conversation on sex with your parents in the 1980s is kind of unusual, definitely. And in my house, you could. There was no problem. So whether it was anything very physical and body related, or philosophies, or thought processes, or religion, or spirituality, everything was there to have a conversation about. So I think I lucked out that way. And we were all an argumentative lot, all of us. My brother probably least of the lot, but my mother, yes, my dad, definitely, and very strong opinions. Everybody had strong opinions. So it was a great place to grow up. And they all read a lot. I mean, I didn't read it all, but they read. So you almost, in reflection, you start learning. They're talking about what they read. So reading was very, very much part of the home environment. If you look at the influences in my house before I get to school, Swami Chinmayananda was very close to my mother from when she was in college. Somebody who's in the 20th century considered one of the most important figures in Upanishadic thought and reinterpretation, etc., who was very close. At the same time, Krishnamurti was again another stream which was very much at home. Then you had my father, who would probably debunk all this and said all this is unacceptable or something. But the fact is that everything coexisted, right? There was no, there was not anything that would be thrown out of the window, So that was a good space to be in. And then I joined KFI, and KFI is an incredible environment. It's a place where you just learn. You're not taught, you learn. And there's a huge difference being taught and just to learn. You learned. And it was physically a beautiful space to be, a fabulous campus. It was also physically free. I've had classes sitting on trees. We've told the teacher, let's not have class today, and we would not have class today. Not because we were just trying to just wail away our time, but just that, let's talk about something else. Yeah, well, let's talk about something else. So, it was an incredible environment to find space as a young child and as a teenager too. And to explore things. It was, or not that there were not boundaries, there were rules and regulations like any organization, but to be able to explore things without fear. I think if there's one takeaway from KFI is, I think, fearlessness. And I mean that in the most profound sense. I think that's what's special about KFI for me. That's it actually. Everything else is built on it. I was lucky because there was no conflict with my home space. I think that was a very lucky position to be in, because it's possible that there's conflict, right? And then it becomes it's almost dual, how does one, and then I think when you grow up, you don't know how to reconcile, and you struggle with that duality. For me, that never was a struggle. So I was lucky, extremely lucky, that my home environment was not very different from my school environment. It was not very different. So yeah, that probably sums it up. I remember Pata class. That's something I'll never forget. It used to be at home in those days, and Sitaram Sharma sir used to come home in the evening at 5 o'clock. I remember that I used to really get angry because that was my cricket playing time, and those days you played cricket on the street, and so those days I could not play cricket. So always music class was competing with my cricket interest at that point of time. I never thought I was going to become a musician or anything like that. Then they sent me to these little competitions that these sabhas conduct, and I won 1 or 2 prizes here and there. One thing is, there was no great pressure from home. That probably came from privilege, very honestly speaking, that I should become a musician. Music was something I did, and like you do in many houses, you also learn music, kind of a thing. I think it was only presumed that way. So Sharma sir comes from the village Kuchupudi. So he comes from there, and he moved to Madras then to join Kalakshetra. So he was in Kalakshetra for 24 years till 1984, if my memory is right. And he was pretty much composer, singer. He was part of that whole team that Rukmini Devi had built, that solid team that was part of creating all her magic. And so sir became acquainted with my parents through T.T. Vasu, actually. So Vasu used to be an amateur singer, and he wanted to just have classes, and he got, I don't know how he got in touch with Sharma sir. And then because my mother was trying to, shall we say, resurrect her musical singing prowess, he said, why don't you learn from Sharma? And that's how he became a family friend. He used to be at home every evening. Whether I had class or not, he would be there. He would be chatting with my father, have a few drinks with my father. This was like an every evening session that happened. He was pretty much family more than anything else. And for me, almost became a father figure because he knew me from when I was 3 years old, literally, right? So he was an old school person in every sense of the word, And so classes were tough, rigorous, disciplined, repetitive, everything. And I'm not saying any of this in terms of as a critique at all, but that's what he was, and that has great benefits. As a musician now, I can reflect and say how much that has helped me. In fact, my laziness today is I get away with laziness only because I got all that grounding done well when I was then, right? I never knew there was something called a music book for 6 years. I didn't know. I never knew that there was something called a Varnam book, that you could write a song. I never knew because he used to just sing and I used to sing. And I had to remember, so I remembered. If I forgot, I forgot. There was no recovery system. So you just forgot. If you didn't remember Monday class, if the next class was Wednesday, I didn't remember, I did not remember. So, which also meant that I paid more attention, which also meant that I was, one thing I know is I always loved singing. I mean, I was never scared to sing. Then when he and my mother started Kalapeetham, which was a music institution, my classes moved there. That's when, by the way, I started learning in a group. Till then I never knew there was group learning also. It was incredible to learn from him because he gave me order. I mean, order is not a regiment if you understand order. So that he may have not told me, but the ability to understand order happened because I practiced order. If I don't practice order, then I can't reflect about it, right? So I think the fact that he gave me that order has helped me reflect about it and then see what happens with it and what can happen with it. So yeah, that's I think his biggest gift to me. I mean, every kacheri he used to come and he used to always say, this was not okay, that's not, and he's not he's an old timer, he's not a person coming to say, you sang so well today. I have never heard it from him. So you have a teacher who never said you sang well. Now, did that put my self-confidence down? Actually it did not at that time. But was that more reflection of me as a personality? If you had the same teacher with a person who was maybe slightly weaker in this sense, would that have then discouraged the person to sing? These are complicated like scenarios these things make you reflect about, right? Because now the philosophy is to be appreciative and to enable it. Now, I'm not saying wrong or right, but I'm just saying it's very interesting about all these shifts that happen. It also depends on who the receiver is, I think. I think depending on the receiver, these things change. And what was, I think, a very important contribution that he did to me that I didn't realize then is also the openness about dance. You know, he was a person who sang for dances, for dancers, he composed for dance, understanding that language, for example. Bharatanatyam is not being enabled by music, right? Bharatanatyam is music. To understand that was very easy for me because I had a teacher who was part of that world. So, and I've sung for dance performances. Even then, I remember one I've sung with him. So I've actually done that before. I used to go for his rehearsals at Malvika's house, I remember, as a kuti boy. So I understood what it meant to compose for dance. I understood that form. I may have not had the maturity to respect it then the way I should have. But that stays with you. And when you grow up, you kind of then things start opening up in a way that doesn't happen normally. I think I owe that also to him, definitely, to be able to understand that nuance and that different texture of music itself, you know. So that is also something very important from him, which I would have not got if I had learned from, within quote, a Carnatic guru in that sense, right. I think Shemudi Mama happened a year before I got married, probably 1996 then. I still remember it was Ramanavami. Shemudi Mama knew my family because of the old connections. He knew my father. And for some reason, he was invited as a chief guest at a concert I sang. You know, little temple in Adyar, past Adyar. It's called Krishna Mandira. Most people don't know it exists, a little temple. My concert was there for Ramanavami series. And Shemudi Mama came and he had come early, I remember. And he came and said, "Na edukku vandirukken theriyuma? You know why I've come? I've come because you're singing." He has never heard me sing. And he tells me specifically that he will only listen for half an hour and he'll go away because he's old and can't sit. I said, fine. He hung around for about an hour and 15 minutes. And then as he was walking out, he looked at my father and said, "Send him to me." 1996, Vijayadashmi, I was in his house and said, "Will you teach me?" And so that was completely different relationship, entirely different relationship. And by then I was singing little concerts. 1996, I'd started performing from about 89 technically, but say from 92 at least. So I was this young performer, junior slot, sub-senior, and people knew who I was. He was the most cool old guy I've met, honestly. Really the most cool. Most cool, by saying most cool, I'm not saying it was easy. He was just, the right word is bindas. He was who he was. Everything under the sun I've chatted with him. With an 80+ man and a 20-year-old boy, it was crazy. But it was refreshing in many ways for me because I could just chat with this man, And then he was at the same time, a very serious person, music and all, very, very serious. So, I could go and say, "Teach me this song, that song." And I went to his house usually in the mornings around 10ish. I never got back till 3. I've had so many times I've had lunch with him. We'd be just only both of us. It was not so it used to be lovely, and he used to take a siesta. When he take a siesta, I'll be just sitting there doing nothing. It's not like I had some work. I was just sitting there. Then after half an hour, he'll say, "Okay, va padala." And then, he will sing a bit, and then he will talk. So it was like a lovely immersion into his life, pretty much, and music was part of it. And then discussions will be part of it, whether it's about ragas, about anything, about politics. And if the December season is happening and I happen to go, then he'll say, "What happened this morning in the morning session?" And then I remember I told him once they're discussing some raga. For the last 80 years, they're doing the same thing, is what he told me. So he was really, really quite a personality. And, it was great to know him that way. And he was also a passionate teacher. I had some great experiences. I've had him call once and actually threatened me. He called me once. I had not gone for class for about 2 months. I was already performing 98, 99. I was singing a lot. And I remember that I had not gone at Sri Ramam Naranagoda Kirtana. I think I had stopped at Anupallavi. Charnam had not been taught as yet. He called me one morning and said, I'll say it in English. He said, I'm an old man by the name Shamaguri Srinivasa Iyer calling you. So I said, yeah, tell me, Mama. He said, do you want to learn the Charanam or no? So next 20 minutes I was in his house. I said, I'll see you in 20 minutes. So I mean, that's special. I mean, that somebody cared enough to call you and say, do you want to learn it? Is something special. So, you know, I have incredible experiences with him. I was a chauffeur in between. So anytime he wanted to go anywhere, he'll call me and say, come with your car. And then he didn't approve of the quality of the car I had. He'd say, you are seeing so many concerts, can't you just get yourself a better car? So it's like, I don't have so much money. So it was a lot of banter, a lot of fun, a lot of music, a lot of serious conversation. And he was a very technical person also. You could have very serious technical conversation. What was, I think, important, I think, is he was a person who found I'm not talking about practice, I'm talking about musical theory, right? So he found a way to bridge practice, theoretical practice, or theory in practice, with what is bookish theory. He was able to understand the confluence of the two. He was able to see where they meet, and he didn't have a problem with conflict. See, the biggest problem with modern theorization is we are not able to handle conflict. And I think there's a lot of bunkum going around in the name of theorization, which is just creating limitation to the abstractive possibility of music in the name of organizing it, right? And I think that's killing music. The other problem is we think that we have to create something that everybody has to agree about. No, we have to create something that everybody can actually think about. That's what we should be doing, right? That was what is amazing about him. So when he spoke about theory, or, you know, I'm speaking very serious music now, I know, but when he spoke about theory, it was not, he could reflect on both and say, look, you know, Sampradaya Prashni ipdi potirukku, but you know, the practice is like this, but maybe we should understand it like this. Now, the fact that you're willing to find bridges and not dismiss one for the other is incredible intellectual maturity. That's intellectual maturity, you know, and to debate it, that's maturity and that's thought. So, by the time I met Mama, I think he was also past his practice times, right? He could just sit and think about this and share it with you, and you know, there was no compulsion of anything. So, which was fascinating. I could go and ask him any questions. I remember once I asked him some question on Nilambari and he was super angry with me. I said some phrase, I don't remember now. And I was looking at this structure and saying, he said, what is wrong with you? And then he sang 4 compositions. He said, can you see it coming all over here? It may not in the book, shall I tell you which patantaras it comes? In this patantara, this patantara, this patantara. Are you telling me that every one of those thought processes are thoughtless? Now, that was important for me at that stage in my life. So actually my interest in theory in a way is also kindled by him. Though he never spoke about it in that fashion. It was kindled by him. So if you ask me when I actually learned from him, like continuously, it's 3 months. What did those 3 months do to me is the question. The 3 months in many ways made me the musician I became. Those 3 months. And I'm saying this in the sense of pushing me to another level of understanding music. I think every guru kind of pushes you to one, and then somebody pushes you somewhere else. Then somebody opens something else, right? And I think that's the magic. And it's not one better than the other or one. Everybody is giving you something, and in all that there is some incredible movement happening. Where you take it is a different thing. If I sing Neraval and Tanam today, I owe it to him entirely. Entirely. There's no doubt about it. I had no clue what Tanam was, I had no clue what Neraval was. It's not like my previous guru did not teach me, but you know what I mean. They give you a certain set of equipment, but how do you switch that on, you know? And then how do you know to play with it to make sure what comes out is beautiful? That was Chengalpet. And like my first guru, he was also a taskmaster, okay? But because I was older, I guess, slightly, and I didn't know him so well, right? He didn't have a personal contact with me. He did it differently. You know, he called me Singakutti. And I remember classes, I would start singing some complicated Pallavi, Neraval, and he'll say, I would be singing for 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and he'll stop me and say, start from the beginning. It's not okay. So I used to be pushed to the point that I'm pushed to a wall where my brain's dead. The brain really freezes and say, you know, I'm done, I'm choked. But, you know, in any field or in any endeavor, walls are always going to appear. I'm talking about ideationally. And this is not special about art. This is just true of anything. The question is, one, can you recognize the wall? Second, can you break it? I think Chengalpet taught me how to break that wall. I mean, again, I'm intellectualizing something this person did very naturally. So I remember first he would never let me give up. And he did it in incredible fashion. He would pause and then come back and say, okay, give it a shot again. And so he actually taught me how to break the wall. And once the wall is broken, all the world's a stage. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing that can stop you. And then if you ask me what Shyamagudi gave me, he gave me expanse. He told me how to fill what's available after that. You can find an expanse and not know what to do with it, right? And Mama told me, yeah, just breathe and it will get filled. And that's what he gave me. Chengalpet was amazing. It was 3 months. But after that, I kept in touch with him. So if I need any kirtanam, if I needed some song, I'll call and just go to his house and learn and come. And he was a darling. He used to cycle to my Music Academy concert, sit somewhere in the corner, call me the next morning, tell me how it was. But he would never say one negative thing. That was his nature. I mean, he would not say anything wrong. Mama was not like that. Shyamagudi Mama would tell you things, but he will also tell you differently. So I had a close relationship with him till his very end, very much. Though we may have not spoken very often, very closely. And then I know he had a special place for me, definitely. I'm no prodigy, probably closer to a prodigy. So I'm not any of that who had this immense talent, who just burst into this scene or nothing like that. And I'm quite glad that I didn't fall into that category, or at least was not imagined to be something that I was not. Later, a few years later, when I was 12, is when I first sang in public. That was when the Music Academy had this Spirit of Youth. They started about a year or two before. And actually they had 2 slots in it. Most people don't know there was 2 slots in it. One was a 1 hour slot, one was a 1 hour 15-minute slot. Don't ask me what the difference that 15 minutes make, because I've still not figured it out. I think, getting on stage, very honestly, gives you a different kind of a feeling, right? And I think that's the first time that kicked in. as a 12-year-old, you're there on stage, and that time it used to be the Music Academy main hall, not the mini hall that you see it now. It was a main hall, and you have at least 200 people seated there, most of them family and friends, because you drag along the whole community with you, right? And I remember that was exciting. It was quite exciting, and I think that really excited me, being on stage. And I won't forget this. After that concert, Shruti, the magazine Shruti, that is probably one of the few magazines for Indian music, Patabi, who used to run it, actually came on the side and gave me 100 rupees. So I have this memory of that 100 rupee note that he gave me. That kind of makes you feel, oh, okay, so I did something quite decent today, right? Well, I was the babe in the group, first of all. I was the kid. I somehow lucked out, and I had people who were at least 8, 10 years older than me as my friends. That's just lucky. It was incredible. I mean, it was just something unforgettable. I mean, I got involved in YSM in about 88, 89, around that period. And just that you had young people discussing music or jamming about ragas, creating games that you could play with music. This whole, I think the stuffiness of Carnatic music was demolished by YSM. I think that's the best way to put it. This whole thing that, it's something only for people who, are very serious or very, focused. You could actually have fun with it, and telling school kids that this is fun, man, you could have fun with it. Was a revolutionary idea. I mean, YSM is a revolutionary idea, without doubt. I don't think we recognize the contribution of YSM enough in the world of Carnatic music. That you could create a carnival with Carnatic music, that you could play games with Carnatic music, that you could have an organization that says we will only feature musicians less than 30. Hindustani musicians have still not woken up. We are in 2021, right? They are still talking. I mean, I'm going to be absolutely blunt about this. I mean, this is truth. I mean, even now they are controlled by all these old mafias. Carnatic music is not the case. There may be 100 problems here. I mean, I'm happy to discuss that. But the fact is, today Carnatic music is young and vibrant. And we owe this entirely to this one conceptual idea called Youth Association with Classical Music. If the Music Academy was a revolutionary idea in the early 19th-20th century, the next big idea in Carnatic music is YACM. That's how important the impact is. And I was part of that gang, right? So it was incredible to me. I mean, all the superstars of today were all together and chatting music, arguing music, listening to tapes and then discussing old recordings, absolutely critical of everything that we heard and listened to, it's what you do when you're young. What else will you do? Everybody is wrong and you know everything. If you don't have that attitude, you're not young. I mean, at that time you believe that you kind of figured everything out, right? So it was astounding. It was astounding, and I think that environment had a huge role for me to play in my in creating excitement to be a musician. To be a musician, you should be excited about it. And the excitement was that, you could sing and three young people come, everybody's watching each other, and then you're looking at, that's so much fun, right? That's what it is, to create that spark and that camaraderie and that criticism. And another very important thing which I think is missing now, and it's just, the reason for it is just situational, is that we were all not professional then, okay? So we all came in as amateurs who also sang or who tried to sing, one of the two, right? So our relationship was bound by the love for music only. We never thought we were going to make careers of this. Maybe a few did, but not many, right? So, and it was not even viable to make a career of Carnatic music then, let's be very practical. So we could easily tell each other what we wanted about the other person's performance. I've had concerts where come saying, "Enna paadna nee, paata paadna." That unfortunately today, in my opinion, doesn't exist, because the young people come in as professionals, right? So the scenario has changed, because now it's become aspirational to be a musician in some way, right? So that changes your relationships. Then everybody in a way is, it's territorial after a point, right? Because the fact that we were the first generation trying to do it, we were lucky. That we could exchange notes, we could critique each other, and it was never personal. Then it was never personal. So yeah, it was an amazing time. It was truly quite electric within this little niche world of Carnatic music. Yeah. It was not like I regretted it or I thought it was horrible one day and I said, what am I doing? No, it's not. It was incredible. It gave me satisfaction. I was happy. I was extremely thrilled that people were happy. I was seen as this person carrying forward this Hori tradition. I was considered the young classist, if there's a word like that. And so I ticked all the boxes, and I was happy about ticking all the boxes. So, interesting things don't come from regret. I think they may come from questioning yourself or being deeply moved or affected by something. I think it starts from experiences within the format or within the sampradaya. Not just, I won't even call it a format. I think it's reductionist to call it a format. Within that performative, I think there were experiences I had that questioned the performative. And that's, I think, the first doubt. Is every time I had experiences that I would call profound, there were moments when the performative actually completely disintegrated. So I think that what seemed to be, looks to me to be a problem, that you have a performative that is very pleasurable, that I enjoy, that everybody enjoys, and then something happens that is just so overwhelmingly incredible that happens only because this disappeared. So then you start questioning the existence of this. Around the same time, or a little later, I started reading about Carnatic music, history, literature, manuscripts, because I was just curious about, I think all this also goes back to my home and my school, where, because we use these words, big sampradayam, 2000 years, we love, we say it even today. When people say it, I don't even know that they read a book which is 50 years old. What is this 2000 years we are talking about? All this raised one fundamental question for me. The performative is a reflection of a body, of something. But can the performative become the body? Is the question. Now, if the performative becomes the body, there is a problem with the body. Because a body should automatically provide multiple reflections. So, is the body completely dependent on what experience the performative gives? Secondly, is the performative actually giving experience of the music? Is a concert actually telling you what Carnatic music is? And I think no. I bluntly will say no. I am not saying it is not beautiful. You can still love it. But we are asking a very serious question here, and we are asking a question that we have to look at dispassionately. Not because I love it, not because my guru said it, not because we have said it 2000 years. Let us forget about all that and ask this very honest question. And you ask this honest question, and for me the answer is very clear. The concert did not reflect the music. I in fact will go one step further and say I think it belittled the music. And I have no problem saying it, even if people think I am criticizing the past. Yes, I am criticizing the past. Yes, I am criticizing the past, and I think that's an important process of human endeavor. And that's one of the fundamental problems in worlds like Carnatic music. There is no critical mind. How can you make music without a critical mind? A critical mind is not a plastic, synthetic, stale mind. It's an emotional mind. A critical mind is an emotional mind, because music you feel. I'm asking this question because I don't feel the music. The music, not the performance. I feel the performance and I love it. Actually, my students have asked me, Anna, want to constantly sing that way. I said, I can do it. It's not very hard to do. I will be bored out of my wits. I may get more applause than I ever get today, because I know how to get an applause. I know what to do to make you happy. And if that's all music is, it's a waste of my time. What is my time? So, the first thing I did, I remember the first instance was actually 2 concerts. One was at Mylapore Fine Arts, 1 December, and I just sang Kannada. I remember I sang Kannada and I just felt like singing Neranamiti in the middle of the concert. I mean, it's not like I planned it, I never thought, but I just sang it. At that point, I never thought this was something big or, revolutionary. I still don't think it's revolutionary, honestly. That people thought it was revolutionary is really the sad state of how we consider Carnatic music. So, the question is also, what's the big deal? T.M. Krishna sang first song, third song became fifth song, seventh song became ninth song. I mean, it's not so silly, is it? If it is so silly, then why do you have this form? You have this form because this form you have assigned roles. You have assigned limitations, roles, perceived progression in experience. So, therefore, this form is not about a listing. This form is given because every position has a message. What I questioned was every message. That's what I am questioning. So, it is not just about putting Varnam as taking away the first place, singing to fourth place. Even people still talk about that way, and I am like, I can't explain it anymore. I mean, I cannot explain it. If you are not able to see the difference between what happens to a Varnam when it suddenly becomes a different body of work, then I can't explain it to you. But I know the world that opened was started from the possibility when I just started moving, and then everything moved. Along with this was also my work with old treatises, etc. So, in my world of raga today is very different from the world of raga that I had 20 years ago. I see raga in a way I cannot explain it to you how I see it, but I know it's completely different. It's the world of raga changed for me. The world of composition changed for me. The picture that emerges when I start singing is a picture that is entirely different from the picture that I had 20 years ago. It's entirely different. Is it good, bad, ugly? I don't care. I really don't care. But this is the picture that is evolving, and this is the picture I want to walk into. Whether you want to walk into or not, you decide. I've only said 10% of the complexities that are there in it. And there are probably parts of it I don't want to talk about also. The whole interconnection between aesthetic structures and philosophical thought processes, and then later on my own sociological journeys, all kind of, it's quite amazing on how they all come together in many ways. So when you tried something, for example, when I sang Neraval for a Varnam, I mean, is a Neraval and a Varnam same as a Neraval and a Kirtana? I mean, a fundamental aesthetic question, right? So then how do you conceive of it? I literally had to conceive of it because I had no precedence. So that was one part. There was also the other part of the movement where I believed that the whole way, the hierarchy of the concert itself was problematic. You know, Mummy, the main artist. So which is why if you see I changed the way people sat. We sat like a, I like to say like a jazz quartet. It's like a C, right? So even that changed relationship, musical relationship. That entirely changed the way we made music together. Of course, I'm still the most powerful in that group. I mean, I'm not denying it. But you can ask them, don't ask me. You can ask them. And they will tell you something changes with the way they feel about themselves and they create. So how do you create those freedoms? Ultimately, we are only talking about freedom. We're not talking about anything else. We're talking about freedom. Right? If any form that is unfree is not form. Simple. I mean, it should be a no-brainer for us, right? So any form that enables to be free or the free is form. You know, I think all this together, in a way, it was wonderful to have sometimes verbal conversations. Sometimes we never spoke. We just know something is happening with some people. There were sometimes artists who said, no, let's not try it, and I did not. I did not. He said, no, it doesn't work for me. I said, fine, no problem. So there is also a process of taking people along with you in this. And if somebody is not comfortable with it, then saying no, then we don't do it. Simple as that. The person has. So I think we are still on that journey. It's not like we've completed anything in it. So it was, I think, good to have sparring partners. Good to have people who will say, no, this sounds like total rubbish. At home, I have Sangeeta Shivakumar, who is a musician. She is my biggest sparring partner. She is the kind of person who likes to understand reason, you know, and who will question reason very fast. And so it was. We had huge debates, huge arguments on what was going on. Does it make sense? And we still disagree on certain things that I've done, I do, etc. So that having all these people around who could kind of challenge you is very important. If you circle yourself with people who are going to say that, oh God, you're just amazing, you're just this incredible revolutionary thinker who's thinking like nobody else, this is what, I mean, it's a waste of time. No? So I was, again, I got lucky. I had people who could tell me on my face, this is nonsense. And then I checked myself and said, no, okay, you need to just step back a bit on this one. So all this was good to have at least a few close friends. And I mean, I consider Sangeeta a friend more than anything else. So, you know, to have that kind of friendship who could, you know, who could debate this, who could argue this and look at a different perspective and say, you know, what is going on here? I mean, which is great. So I won't say I moved away from the Sabha circuit. I still do sing in Sabhas, it's like I don't. But I moved away primarily from the December season. That was the first conscious decision. If you're being honest, you can't disconnect the politics of your life from any of these discussions, if you're honest. You could choose not to deal with it because you're comfortable where you are. You could choose, and that's your choice. But I'm not by nature that way. If there's a question that pops up, I will go to the end of the world searching for the next question. That's just how I am. So in a way, I think questions on history, on tradition, on what do I practice. Let's ask a very fundamental question. Why do all of us find the kacheri pleasurable? I mean, it sounds like a very no-brainer question, but it's actually a very complicated question. Why do we find it great? Why? Somebody sang Raga well, that's all fine, but why do we find that community exercise so incredible? Because it's a community exercise. How can we not see that it's a community exercise? So then the next question is, who is the community? And what is the community saying through that exercise? Who are the members of the community? How is the community framed? So what are the other things the community is framing? It's framing sound, it's framing beauty, it's framing correctness, it's framing morality. This is entirely a political statement. So the moment you're asking questions about raga and tala, you have to ask this question also, right? How can you not ask this question? I mean, Tyagaraja is part of this question. Dikshitar is part of this question. It's still, I mean, people get confused in saying which means that I'm belittling Tyagaraja. No, Tyagaraja is an incredible composer, but I'll still ask questions of him. That's my right. Otherwise, why do I have a brain? Rather give it up then. There's nothing hoary in the world, and that is God. That is God. The fact that there is nothing hoary in the world is God. Everything else is what you and I construct. You can believe in it. I can. That's a different thing. So, how is this community built? So, the question started tumbling there. When I then started asking questions of my own identity, my caste, my gender, my privileges, something I've never thought about in my life. I said I was in an open house where everything was discussed. How many times did we discuss caste? Never. Why? Because there is no necessity to discuss caste. It's like asking a white person, why would you discuss racial discrimination in his house? Who never discuss it? Why should I? I was just increasingly uncomfortable with the environment of the music season. Because the music season is like the emblem of Carnatic music. So everything about it comes together in 20 days. All that whole community sense I told you comes together in 20 days. And this huge flag that is hoisted up in certain suburbs of saying, here we are, here we are, here we are, we are the most incredible, we are doing something incredible. This is Indian culture, Indian art, right? That's what we do. Let's just accept we do this first. So, and I'm part of it. I'm still part of it. I may not sing it, I'm still part of it. I can't deny that. So I think that was at conflict with my politics. So I tried a few things for a while. First thing I did is I started singing free concerts in the morning. There are other issues also. The other issues were I felt there was too much importance to stars. That is, even within the Carnatic community, there was too much focus on people like me. There's too much focus on us. There was a time even in the Carnatic music world in the early 90s, and I remember, when not so famous people got healthy audiences. That the community of listeners were interested in good music also. Of course, stars are always there. There was the Santanam who was the superstar. But it doesn't mean that the person who was not that famous did not get an audience, right? So, but that has dwindled today. That entire thing is gone. So I found that very disturbing. So I said, okay, I'll sing only free concerts. And I moved myself to what was considered the morning slot or the old person slot. And I had two reasons to it. I think I was also trying to negotiate a space for myself, very, very practically put. I was trying to find a way I could exist within it and still hold my own. So I moved to the morning, I started singing free concerts, which also, I also felt that even within the Brahmin community, that is the bandwidth within which Carnatic music operates, those who are not privileged enough could not come for the music season, December season concerts. But they are the ones who listen to me in the peak of May, in the heat, in Nanganallur and Ambattur and etc. So my question was, what about access for them? So the multiple accesses we are talking about here. We are talking about access even within the Carnatic world also. So I said it's free, which means that anybody can come. So it's again a process of democratizing it. You know, I did that for a few years. Then I took one season off, took a break. But I finally realized that I can't reconcile it. I just cannot reconcile it. And I'm just trying, and I think I was desperate to reconcile it. Because I loved it. I loved the music season. I loved the environment. I loved the buzz. And I was hoping to find a place where I could hold these philosophical debates, yet be part. And I finally realized it's not possible unless there is some movement from that environment saying, yeah, I think the simple movement is acknowledgement that there is a problem here. You may think of a different way of dealing with the problem from me. I may be far more at your face. that's fine. But if you don't acknowledge there's a problem, then it's very difficult to, of gender discrimination, for example, in Carnatic music. It's horrendous. It's horrendous. That you actually have artists even today in Carnatic music who will boldly say they don't play for women. By the way, it's anti-constitutional to even say it. It's against the Constitution of India. But in Carnatic music, you can say it, that you will not play for women, and use that as a reason. And you will have Sabha secretaries who will say, yes, this person doesn't play for women, therefore we will find a man for whom he can accompany. This is just ugliness, very bluntly, this is ugliness. And the fact that we don't find a problem with it, we don't acknowledge the problem, there's something really wrong about us. Let's start there. There's something seriously wrong. It's amazing we make some beautiful music out of all this. It's quite amazing actually that we do, considering all this. So, I think finally I decided I had to step out. But it's not like I don't have relationship with Sabhas, because I'm still an insider. I'm still an insider. So I do sing in Sabhas on off season. I sing only free concerts whenever, and not that every Sabha wants me, but whoever wants me, I do sing. I prefer singing for smaller Sabhas in suburbs, and I sing regularly in many places, whether it's Perambur or Ambattur or Nanganallur, Porur, etc. When they call, I've never said no, never, unless I'm not free. Because there is that little community there that loves Carnatic music that's never going to be able to be part of the Mylapore gang. They matter. So when we talk about equality and we talk about equity and when we talk about these multiple democratic values, ethical values, it operates at different levels, it operates in different spheres. And we should be open to these different spheres of possibilities. Jayashree and I started Swanubhava together, and I think YSCM definitely is a part of how Swanubhava happened. And I think at that point we also realized, there was a time in the 90s when you could actually have a conversation with a senior musician. There was no, this separation was not so great. I think Swanubhava hoped to bridge that. That is a primary aim. That's saying, can we get these great artists to interact with young people, especially young artists. That was the first focus. And also young artists of, shall we say, different art fields. So can a painting student speak to a dancing legend? Can a singing student understand a different form? And in which you also bring in within quote so-called classicals, non-classicals, whatever, all these labels. And therefore you kind of create a opportunity for learning. And that's what brought about Swanubhava. And then it expanded also to get school children, because there were a lot of schools interested, saying that we want our students to come. And that's what brought Swanubhava into. Swanubhava is still looking at that as the focus. Okay, that doesn't change. Then Jayashree left Swanubhava, but younger group has taken it over. I still help out. And now Swanubhava has moved to a different sphere. We have moved away from the city. So we are trying to say we are only looking at small villages. So we've done 2 Swanubhavas in 19 before the pandemic. Both were in little villages. So the idea is, I think the role of Swanubhava also needs to evolve. And there's some introspection that still needs. This happened around the time that I left the music season. And I had this idea in my head. So, like I told you about how everything is a community creation. So, I felt that needed to be challenged. That certain art forms can only occupy certain spaces, have only certain audiences. And all these are, what decides all these things? If somebody tells me it is aesthetics, I'll tell them go take a hike. Because I'll be happy to show you examples about how certain art forms have jumped spaces because the sociology of the people who are holding the art form changed. For example, what happens to Sadir becoming Bharatanatyam? It's in the proscenium stage, in the international stages. How did that happen? Because holding community shifted. It's a classic case. So, till it is Sadr, it is only in temples and it is only etc., etc. Then it gets a makeover in the early 20th century, and Brahmin women start learning it, and then it becomes fashionable, and then there is a new body idea that is created, color idea that is created, aesthetic that is created, and now it is respectable enough to be on every proscenium stage, represents Indian culture. Now, how does this happen? This happens because the holding community shifts. So, to tell me something belongs somewhere is deeply problematic. We are designing what belongs where. I mean, this kind of sociological shifts, aesthetic shifts happen in many spheres. I mean, Maharashtrian, like Maharashtrian theatre, traditional musical theatre, Tamasha, Lavani, if you look at which are the forms that were pushed to the side, considered lewd, considered, not appropriate for cultured watching. All these are part of who owns it, who practices it. All these are part of very similar movements, and this is universal because society is about power, right? And some power group is holding it at some point of time and trying to appropriate something from somewhere and then change it to suit what they believe should be dominant culture. So, everybody wants to create dominant culture ultimately, right? Whether it's and the thing we forget is creating dominant culture is in sound, color, smell and taste. It's not anywhere else, and we forget that always. As much as we're having this discussion today, we still feel that certain things are aesthetic and certain things are not aesthetic. Do we ever challenge that? I do. Where is that coming from? If I saw a fluorescent pink house, I'll say it's ugly. Can I ask the question, why am I saying it's ugly? Because if you're going to have an aesthetic conversation, because aesthetics is not about preferences. Aesthetics by its word is understanding form, structure and intention of some body. So, you can have a most beautiful looking building that doesn't serve the purpose of why it is built. That's an unaesthetic building. If you have a chair in which you cannot sit, it's an unaesthetic chair even if it is engraved in the most gorgeous manner. So, aesthetics is a complex idea. So, we have to look at it not in the personal way, because we are all conditioned in that personal way, right? For example, India loves earth colors now. We love earth colors. That's actually homogenizing taste. Everybody thinks Kalakshetra palette is the most beautiful palette in Chennai. Rubbish. Homogenizing design. That's conditioning. You can still love it, but can you accept this? That's all I'm asking. Because if you accept it, then you open yourself to a possibility. That's all we demand of ourselves first. So, I mean, we don't even understand that word aesthetics and we use it so loosely, and we're all artists. We don't even understand that word. It's not about whether you like one Sangati and the other person like, no. The question is, within that body that we call the raga, where does, even if it is beautiful to your ear, does it fit into what that body is? And that's the observation question we are asking. So, many of these movements, these things are happening because we are conditioned in a certain manner. Asking a question is taken as somehow insulting somebody or something. By default, you're insulting somebody or something. And that's a cultural baggage that we have fundamentally, and we have to get rid of it. If not, I mean, I always say, if everything was sorted out 2000 years ago, if everybody has worked out everything, then why are you and me here? If our job is only to constantly reinterpret something that was said 2000 years ago, then why have this? To reinterpret or redesign. No, there has to be more why you are here. Otherwise, why you have the frontal lobe is a waste. So, I was introduced to a friend called Nityanand Jairam, who is a very well known environmental social justice activist. And I came up with this idea. I met him in his office in Urur Olcott Kuppam. With him was Saravanan, who belongs to the Kuppam. And I said, look, I have this idea that we need to equalize arts. And through equalizing arts, we can find at least a possibility to equalize people. even momentarily, even if it means only those 3 days. At least enable that little relationship. So, I think from that came out Ooru Alkotkuppam Vizha. And in a way, 3 of us came from 3 different angles. I came from an artistic angle, then Nityanand Jairam came in from the angle of saying there is inequality in how the city treats, for example, the village of Ooru Alkotkuppam in West Nagar Beach. So, this is a great place to create that conversation. Saravanan said ours is a 200-year-old fishing village that nobody even knows exists. It is our pride that we need to show people how beautiful our place is. So, you had 3 different perspectives on why it should happen. That is how it started, and we were not an organization, we still are not an organization, just a group of people, and the group is kind of fluid. Every year you have new volunteers joining in, some go away, some core group is about 10 of us, and the whole idea is, can we democratize notions of people, arts? See, I basically think 3 things need to be subverted: space, people, content. Art has to subvert one of these 3 things: space, people, and what is in it. And in a way, the Vida was that. And then the Vida grew into Chennai Kalai Thiruvida, and has now moved to North Chennai, has moved to different spaces. So, but it is the same conceptual baseline that we can have serious conversations and at least glimpses of multiple cultures. And I think something magical happens when people who will not sit together suddenly for 2 hours, rub shoulders, and enjoy some performance. And through that performance, you also understand people, their life. And then maybe you ask that extra question about that person's life. Maybe your suspicions become less. Maybe next time you walk on the street, you will ask somebody about how they are doing, which you would not do. This is what we are hoping for finally. It was quite incredible meeting the Jogopas. It was thanks to Shubha Chacko of Solidarity Foundation. So, when the first possibility discussed was a concert by me and a concert by them on the same evening. Then I just raised this idea and saying, can we perform together without a clue about what their music sounded like? I had no idea. I just said it like that. I don't even know why I said it, and maybe I said it too because I realized I was uncomfortable with the idea. I'm also that kind of a person who tends to push myself if I know I am not comfortable with something, because I think the fact that I'm not comfortable means that there's an issue with me. Maybe that's the instinct that worked. So, I first met them, Siddhamma, Rakhi, all of them. I think Madhvi was also there that day, and we just sang to each other. It was incredible to meet them. I think it was multiple sexualities and multiple genders, and understanding this, they have helped me a lot in the interaction. Not that we discussed it. I had so many blocks in my head. We discussed beauty. Here is an example of our constructed beauty, of what is beautiful. In fact, the biggest hurdle for them, I would say in an aesthetic point of view, is this notion of human beauty. That beauty in a man means something, beauty in a woman means something. We have already designed this, and each culture designs it in a more specific sense. But a trans person is beautiful. Do we ever even say that? You know? And then from that comes notions of ugliness. Then from that comes ideas of something being dangerous or something being to fear. So it helped me a lot to make friends with people. And they were most generous. I mean, that was what amazing. They were just normal with me. That's what I meant. I mean, they were just normal with me. Like they treat me like any other person. Right? And imagine what their lives are like. They're always treated as being different, marginalized, pushed to the corner in every fashion. And for them to treat me normally is just generosity. Right? Just generosity. And so it has been a very, very precious friendship. You can't think of this relationship only in terms of genders. Right? It's also just that they are artists and I am artist. So when are we going to reach that stage in our society where you're going to think of this collaboration as just collaboration between two artists? We are not in that stage. It's a collaboration between T.M. Krishna and transgender musicians. You don't say a male heterosexual T.M. Krishna because that is the norm accepted. That is universally ticked off, ticked box. So it's been quite a learning for me, and I think it's helped me understand so many things about body, about physicality, about how we feel about these things. Because like I've said before, my only interaction with trans people was in a traffic signal or in the train, and you're taught to be scared of them. We are all ugly people. We all can do ugly things, but we allocate uglinesses of multiple sorts on certain sections of society and push them to the margin. And what they need is not sympathy. Sympathy must be thrown into the dustbin. It's the worst feeling you can have. It's condescending. Even if you write the biggest check in the world, it is still condescension. What we need is honesty to ourselves and empathy, both together. That's what we need. You need to be honest to yourself and you must have empathy. Then we are a far better place. I don't think there's a necessity for me to reconcile it also. I don't think there's a necessity. I don't see it as, I actually don't see them in conflict at all. Maybe that's me. I don't see a conflict there at all for me to search for reconciliation. I just feel that maybe my palette is expanded. Right? With my sound, like I told you, what I hear now is not what I heard before, which is why when I said the raga now is different, is I hear differently. I think it also enables, it's also a question of habit sometimes, isn't it? You hear the same thing for 30 years and you think that is the palette, right? I've also learned that, for example, even the Porumboka party, when you said this, right? The first time I sang it, even after I recorded it, I won't say I was most comfortable with it. We use only certain set of words in our entire repertoire of Carnatic music, probably 200 to 300 words. Okay? Those words come in different combinations and different edited versions. In each language you can have 300 words. That's about it. So when you're accustomed to singing only these 300 odd words in different versions, they become habit. Then the music and them seem to be going together and you're used to that. You're used to its movement, you're used to its sound, you know its musical movement, it limits everything, right? Now I bring a word that has never been heard, it suddenly stands out. You don't even know how to say it musically. I can say Porumboka, but how am I going to sing Porumboka? Boke, Porumboka, how is that going to come? So it takes time for you to find that space within that word, which comes through habit. So I sang it 10 times, and now to me, singing Porambokku is the same as singing Chakkani Rajamargamu. I don't see a difference. It's as easy for me musically. No, so I don't see a difference. As when you start teaching, you basically imitate what you have seen and your teacher did. You don't find yourself yet, right? So I think I've also changed. I don't like some parts of me that I was as a teacher in the initial days. And I've told my students that, they know it. I'm a very demanding person. That's my personality, and I'm not justifying it. And I know that. So I think sometimes I was emotionally demanding on them, and I don't think that was right. And I was younger. I guess I was younger, and therefore it took time for me to also mature, right? So, but I think that the good thing is I have a relationship with them that I can tell them I'm sorry, and I've told them I'm sorry, and that's good. That in a way we've grown together in some way, right? And I can turn around and say, I'm really sorry this happened, and I shouldn't have done this. So which is nice, But I still push them hard. I mean, that's a different thing. This is a different thing. Two different things. Especially when I see something that they don't see, then I will push. நீ பாடு இதே காலப்புறம் வேணும் பாடு Because I see it, it's right there, the door is right there, and I see the door, and you're just not opening the damn door. So I'll push you till you open the door. So I actually think, forget about learning Varnams, Kirtanam, leave that part, right? That's part of what you need to do. But beyond that, I really think the job of a teacher is to point at things that the student herself or himself is singing but not hearing. Somebody told me this ages ago that painting is about seeing, music is about listening. The biggest problem I think with most students of music, and musicians inclusive, is they don't listen. So my only job is to somehow enable each student to say, it's in front of you, learn to see it and listen to it. The moment you've got that, then music first slows down. For me, music is like slow motion now. That's how I see it. It's actually like slow motion. I don't know how to explain this. Everything is slow. It's much slower. அழுதேன் உள்ளம் குமுறி வெடிக்க அழுதேன் 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 அழுதேன்
உள்ளம் குமுறி வெடிக்கழுதேன் கண்கள் சிவக்க கதறிகழுதேன் பொங்கும் வேதனை கொட்டகழுதேன் பொய்த்த.
Everything slows down because you start seeing it with clarity. That's all I try to do with students. Say, you are singing it, it's your mind, it's your body of work, but please recognize it. Because if you don't recognize it, you can't create music. The moment you're recognizing it, I am unnecessary in your life. After that, I'm unnecessary. I'm baggage actually. It's not always easy, and it does get to you, gets emotionally draining at times. But that's part of it, isn't it? I mean, you do something, it's going to, let's also be very honest here. You know it's going to bother people. I can't act like I didn't know it's going to bother people. Right? Let me not act, completely like, I was clueless and I was just having this musical journey and social journey and, no, you know it's going to affect people. So in a way you're aware, you're not unaware. You're aware that this is going to bother people, and in some ways you're also doing it because you know it's going to bother people. That's also an honest truth, because you want them to be bothered. I want people to be disturbed, very honestly, and I'm using disturbed in a very positive sense, because I want you to be troubled and think about it. Don't have to agree, but so in a way, isn't that also art? That you, if art does not make you reflect, it's a waste of my time. And that's what I mean by disturbance, because reflection is a disturbance. Okay? So in a way I am also aware of it, but the violence that sometimes it brings out is troublesome, is something that gets to you, and sometimes it is physically scary, very honestly put. It is actually scary, and it's scary for not just yourself but the people around you. I think the one thing that is very difficult for me to reconcile and to actually find a solution for, because I don't think there's a solution, is all the people around me who get affected because of me. That is going to be something that I'm going to regret all my life. But I really don't have an answer to it. If you ask me, can I solve it? I can't solve it, because they are easier targets than me, and people go after them, and they do it regularly, and that hurts. That hurts, because what do I do? What's my options? Do I say, okay, then I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to become this good person, whatever that means, and I'm not going to do that. At the same time, can I avoid this? No, I can't. So the power that allows you to be who you are, and it's also power and privilege that allows me to in fact do all this and get away with it, right? Bluntly, if I was a nobody, if I was from some marginalized section of society, you would have thrown me into the wayside by now. The only reason people are not doing it is because I have power. But the same problem is, because you have power, you will not be targeted, but those around you with less power will then be the targets of collateral damage. That's hard. That's hard. But I don't have a solution for that. I wish I did. I don't.
Om Tat Sat Shri Narayana Tu Purushottama Guru Tu Siddha Buddhi Tu Skand Vinayaka Vinayaka Savita Pavakatu Skanda Vinayaka Savita Pavakatu Siddha Buddhi Tu ब्रह्ममस्दतु मस्दतु 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 ब्रह्ममस्दतु ब्रह्ममस्द ब्रह्ममस्द ब्रह्ममस्दतु यह्व शक्ति तु ब्रह्ममस्दतु यह्व शक्ति तु ईशु पिता प्रभु तु ईशु पिता ब्रह्ममस्दतु यह्व शक्ति तु ईशु पिता ईशु मस्त यह्व ईशु रामकृष्ण तु रहीमता 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 ओ तू यह्व शक्ति रही